E aí, pessoal, bem-vindos a mais uma vez no nosso cantinho aqui da internet, onde a gente fala muito sobre coisas que a gente quer desafiar, sobre essas verdades do mercado que a gente acha que a gente não aguenta mais ouvir, né? Desafiar essas falácias, essas crenças, abrir mão desse negócio que é difícil. Então hoje a gente está aqui para desafiar mais uma experiência que é muito glorificada e muito glamorizada. Mas antes da gente começar a discutir, eu tenho que trazer uma novidade para vocês, que é o seguinte: eu avisei umas semanas atrás, lá no meu Instagram, que a partir de agora, não só o podcast, mas meu conteúdo é bilíngue. Então hoje é o primeiro podcast que a gente vai ter em inglês. Então agora eu vou terminar essa frase, vou mudar para o inglês e vou me apresentar. E aí a gente começa o podcast de hoje. So, switch to English now. And basically, hi everyone. This is me speaking in English for anybody who never heard me speak in English. So there you go. You're welcome. You're getting it for free, which is amazing. Okay. So my name is Renato Herman. For those who don't know me, I've worked in HR for about 12 years all around the world. And this is important for the topic of conversation on this day. And after leaving the HR world, being a little bit traumatized by it, having my good, beautiful burnouts, I realized two things. One, that I could take what I learned from all the things that I've been through and help the corporate world to be a healthier place and to be a better place for everyone else. And also realize that our HR world is a little bit, the word in Portuguese is sucateado, which I guess we could say recycled. It's not doing great, right? And I realized that I could be a person to help with the way that I work and what I call the 3 pillars of high performance and healthy work, which is mental health, leadership, and human relationships, which tends to fall into more on the generational aspect of the relationships. But anyway, human relationships in general. And my job in this world is to really, for the companies, is to give you the tools to get where you want to get as a company without leaving any bodies in the way, as we say in Portuguese, without leaving a trail of blood, I guess is the saying in English. So because there is a way to be a high performing company with insane results without letting people get too burned out, without letting people get sick. And today we're here to talk about an experience that was something that wanted to do my entire life, and I ended up doing. That's why one of the reasons why this content is bilingual is living abroad, so leaving my country. And I've lived abroad for now 4 years, 4 years and a half, actually, a little bit over 4 years. And my experience is very particular different from a lot of people because I moved right before the pandemic. So I never got the experience abroad pre-pandemic. I got the post-pandemic, if that makes sense. And it was a very interesting experience because from where I come from, which is Brazil, there is this glamorization of living abroad, mostly to Europe, to the United States, or Australia. So there is this glamour around leaving your country and being able to be a person that, does something international and lives abroad. But the reality is very much different. And it's very interesting because even though a lot of us move out of Brazil and struggle in these other countries, it feels like fancy because you're struggling in English or whatever people say, you know? So today the topic that we wanted to challenge is this glamorization of living abroad. Is this experience of everything is going to be amazing and you're in a new country and things can be hard, but once you get there and it's going to be incredible and amazing and wow. So there is truth to that for sure, because a lot of people were able to get that, but a lot of the times we don't validate the struggles. And I guess the main point where this connects with me personally is a lot of the times when I was struggling and I would have conversations with friends back home, their reaction would be, "Oh, but you're all the way over there."
The toxic positivity.
Exactly, that toxic positivity of, "Oh my God, you're all the way over there." So, as I always say in this podcast, we do not need another white man with a microphone having a podcast. So I never wanted to do this podcast alone. I want to bring and invite people to do this podcast with me. And today I invited a dear friend of mine who I met in Berlin. I am Brazilian. She's American. We met all the way over in Berlin. Now she is in Nigeria, spending some time. I live here in the UK. We're everywhere around the world. So I wanted to invite her to talk about this experience because she's done it way more than I did. And I think she has an interesting perspective being a person from the US, having a different perspective than mine that is a Brazilian person. So I welcome to the stage, to the small little wooden stage of this podcast, Kimberly Ibidapo. Please introduce yourself. Welcome. Thank you so much for accepting the invitation and being
Thank
here.
you. It's an honor to grace this beautiful stage. Super happy to be here and also, be a part of this conversation. I think we need to have more often to demystify and destigmatize that problems, issues, loneliness, depression, anxiety, struggles happen no matter what zip code you are. Sometimes it happens in places where we have free healthcare and a better social safety net, but the individual experience is just as valid no matter where you are. It's just very nuanced. But a bit about me. I'm Kimberly, born and raised in Houston, Texas, but I am first generation Nigerian American. So I'm an hyphenate. I'm Nigerian American. My background is in mental health, well-being, and DEI, and that is why the first move I made in my life was to Berlin, Germany, was to pursue my master's in organizational psychology, where I specialized in employee engagement and interpersonal relationships at work. And so that's also where I met my wonderful dear friend Renato, and we built an amazing friendship and working relationship. I was in Berlin, Germany for around 4 years, around 4 years. And then I moved to Bangkok, Thailand for around a year and some months. And now I'm currently in Nigeria visiting family, but I'm actually relocating to Amsterdam in like 5 days to start my also another career. So in a sense,
Oh my God, 5 days. Oh my God, it's so close.
I know, seriously, don't remind me. But yeah, so I guess in a sense, I am a Nigerian American, but I say my formative years in my career has definitely been created abroad. So in a sense, I've lived and worked in 2 different countries, about to embark on my third. I think the Netherlands, or at least the Benelux region, probably has very similarities to German culture, German working culture. So I guess I will understand more once I land, but I guess I can just talk from the experience of living and working in the Western context, so the US and Germany, and also the Eastern context in Bangkok, Thailand, which is Southeast Asia, close to Laos, Vietnam, Myanmar. But Thailand is a very, very interesting and dynamic country in and of itself. And yeah, super excited to start this conversation. And yeah, just really delve into the topic with you, Renato. I think we'd have a really fruitful dialogue. So I'm excited,
Cool. Thank you for being here.
of course.
Was actually very happy that you accepted it because you have such a multicultural experience, which is something that not a lot of people have, which is having this West and Eastern experience to really show the differences. And because you were part of the global South, there are a lot of things that I think you saw that a lot of us, that a lot of like people from my country live, which have similarities for being from the global South. So I think that's such an interesting perspective. And the first thing I wanted to talk about, I guess, the overall concept of today is really about this glamorization of living abroad, right? In Brazil, we have this sense of being the underdog, like we are kind of like the underdog, which has been changing recently. By the way, it
I
has
think
been
so.
I think that has been changing. We have been experiencing less of this underdog feeling, but a lot of us still see other countries as a place to go or as like you made it if you're able to move out of Brazil. First, a plethora of reasons. It's because of the social construct, even because you are able to have a safer life. You are
Of
able to
course.
have access to easier healthcare, for example, when it comes to moving to Europe for a lot of us. So, as you said, it's much easier to struggle in a place with free healthcare, right? With free healthcare that works, so that's one very important thing. So, a lot of us do that move because we want for various different reasons, but the very similar or the same narrative line that crosses everyone is really there is this thing of living abroad makes you a better
Inherently a better
person.
person. Yeah, it's
Yeah,
inherent. It's your worth, your worth, your communal worth, and your self worth increases the second you can say that you studied or lived
yeah,
abroad in a different country. I think I want to acknowledge my privilege. I'm an American. I carry an American passport. I carry two passports, an American and Nigerian. But when I travel, I always carry my American passport naturally. And I'm a native English speaker. So I have to also understand my inherent privilege, right? I'm an American. So for many Americans, there's like this whole like discussion that Americans are very uncultured. We don't travel, et cetera, et cetera. And it's all true because in a sense, the world has revolved around America. And the world has media, culture has been the American standard, right? And most people would migrate to the US or Canada. So I guess North America, Mexico, US, Canada. But let's say, of course, Canada and the US in this context to migrate to. So for me, my experience was one of not survival, but it was more of exploration. So we have to think about, there's kind of like 2 or 3 different pathways to leaving your country because no one leaves their country because they want to, let's be honest. People leave their country for socioeconomic standards, survival, safety, if you're a part of the LGBTQIA plus community. So we have to really just understand what our role is speaking with this. And mine is I chose to leave because the year I decided to leave was when Trump got into office. So in a sense, his ideology was one that I just did not connect with. And B, I think also being a mental health specialist and expert, the world, medicine and psychology is very in the lens of cis het white medicine. And in that lens, I thought for me to be a well-rounded mental health professional, I can't just live and work in the US. I mean, I can always go back home, but I definitely wanted to gain experience, understand mental health and well-being in different contexts of different cultures and regions. And Germany was my first stepping stone into that just because of my master's program, right? So we know that not many universities carry our programs. It's still quite niche and specific. So you don't really have many options, right? And those options are, in a sense, the colonizer option. So for us to understand where we are, we have to kind of go a couple hundred steps back. The idealization of countries are mostly countries that are Anglo-Saxon. It's the US, it's Canada, it's the UK, it's Germany, it's Australia, right? There's only like 8 or 9 countries that people aspire to travel to or live in. Those are countries that, of course, are economic powerhouses, and they're powerhouses because of the backs of other countries that they colonized and imperialized, right? So people will never have to leave their country if the US and France and the UK didn't come and take all the resources. So let's put that out there, right? But let's not have a whole historical conversation. Let's talk about our lived experience.
Absolutely.
So I think we have to just be honest with, some people need to leave because they want to explore and travel and be a worldly citizen, which is amazing. But some of us need to for survival. So I'm talking, of course, through the lens of exploration and becoming a more well-rounded professional. So I did 4 years in Berlin, Germany. And at that point in time, I think it's very difficult when you do migrate because most people migrate on a permanent basis, right? Most people choose to leave their country knowing that they may not ever come back, or if they do come back, it's to visit, right? Because if you uproot your life, you're not uprooting your life for fun and games, uproot your life because you want to create a new home somewhere else. And I knew, like, after my master's and my first career, that Berlin, Germany just wasn't the country for me to flourish. I'm quite American, if you can't tell. I'm very boisterous and personable and extroverted. And if you've ever been to Germany, that is not the case. They're more reserved.
That is not the case at all. And it was so interesting from a Brazilian perspective how being personable is very different between our countries because you would talk to each other in the middle of the street, just like
in the
stop
middle
each
of the
other
street.
and be like, oh, you're American? Oh, where are you from? And then you present yourselves from being from a specific state, which is quite similar to Brazilians, but we're
Yeah.
going to get into that, but there is a little bit of a difference where depending on which country you are in abroad, the Brazilian community functions differently.
I mean,
So
of course.
that's an
Yeah,
interesting.
definitely. I mean, there's xenophobia everywhere. There's even internalized xenophobia. I mean, there's certain parts of people from the U.S. I'm just like, oof, Alabama, ooh, So we may love our country, but some of us are just like, ooh, you're one of us, but ooh, can I stay over there? So yeah, if especially for me is if you're from the South, I already have that because think at least in the U.S. has 346 million people. It's huge, and what is an American? There's no such thing, right? But we do have different state in a sense, or at least regional expressions and identification, right? So for me, I would connect more with somebody from the South, so Texas, Louisiana, Florida, Oklahoma, Arizona, just because of that shared, Southern American upbringing. And I'm sure for Brazilian, I mean, Brazil is just as big as the US, and there's also so much intercultural connections in Brazil. But yeah, I think once you live abroad, you do become your identity, right? I was the American in the office. I was the loud, annoying American, and Renato was the very say it to your face, direct Brazilian who like would not, no sugarcoat anything.
Learned some lessons about that, which is not very Brazilian, by the way, but learned some lessons about that.
Yeah, you do have to operate in the place that you are now trying to assimilate to, right? I, in a sense, realized that my Americanness was maybe what got me through the interview process and through the door. People love the extroverted, personable person, but when it comes to the workplace, people just want you to do your job, right? And so, of course, I had to temper down some of my Americanness, my loudness, my boisterousness in the workplace because that is just how you survive, right? Adapt or die. And working in most Northern European countries, I would say Dutch, Belgian, Luxembourgish, German, they're very efficient, they're very direct, they're very astute. They come to work so they can get their 28 vacation days. I think Americans and Brazilians, we want to come to work to connect, create community, create friendships, especially if we are leaving our home. Most of my closest friends still to this day I met through work, right? Because you don't have this unless you were a student. Most people meet their closest friends in schooling, K through 12. But making adults as a friend is extremely difficult, and work is the main place for people to create those friendships. So you do automatically, in a sense, see work as a refuge. Sometimes for many people, work is the only place that they actually socially connect, which is a bigger issue on the loneliness epidemic. But now that work is most of our lives and it takes most of our hours, you do use work as a way to collaborate and connect and, create community. I think that's very important. But if you're othered, right? If you're the only American or Brazilian or Chinese or Thai person in an office that has a dominant majority, that brings a lot of, a whole host of mental health issues and illnesses. And yeah, and I think that's what I think the biggest, for me, that was the biggest, from talking to other expats and immigrants, that was the biggest stem of maybe ill health, was that loneliness, was that suffering in silence, because expressing these types of issues to friends back home, like it's hard to validate someone's experience that you think the experience is 5 stars, right? It's like when a celebrity complains about something, it's like you have no right to complain about nothing. You're a celebrity. And for many of our friends, especially when I was during Trump's America, I was looking at my friends going through in COVID, dealing with so much harm and struggle, and these are people with high socioeconomic capabilities. They're all people who have multiple degrees and they're still struggling, and so saying things about something that's happening in Germany, where we were very safe, thankfully. Our government intervened very quickly. We were working from home. We had access to the vaccine. I was talking to my friends who were stuck at home for a year, right? Like, how can I complain, or how can I create a space for you to validate my feelings when Trump's in office? And I think for you also was Bolsonaro, right? Is this like you saw your friends and your community going through a lot, especially our queer community going through a lot under these very dictator fascist regimes. Let's just put it out there, right? And so I think we do romanticize these experiences because they are quite phenomenal, right? It's really beautiful to say that you lived abroad. It's really beautiful to say that you are culturally, experienced, but to every side, there's always a different side to the coin, especially if you are not cis het white male.
And I have a question about that. How would you attribute that glamorization of this fantasizing about living abroad from an American perspective? Because back home is that underdog that the only way is out, or some of the way is out. Of course, this is not a reality for everyone, but
For sure.
there is this thing of you left the country. There is this fanciness of leaving the country. How does that happen from an American perspective?
I'm one of the only few Americans that I know who have actually chose to live abroad. So for many Americans, I think it's more of the study abroad is very big. We love to study abroad. Many Americans who have access to college and universities always take a semester abroad in France, Spain, the UK, Australia, right? And so that's more of the commonness of an American living abroad. It's usually for a semester, for year, for educational purposes. It's very, very rare to have an American who chooses to live abroad indefinitely. You may be part of like a multinational company, and so like you're stationed in, one of the international offices, but the contract ends and you go back home. It's still a very, very, very rare thing to have someone who, unless it's for love. Of course, I've met many Americans who migrated because they met their partner, and they migrated for that. But migrating for the sake of migrating abroad, it's still a very rare case in the U.S. actually, because in a sense, we Americans think the world revolves around Americans, and so why would y'all want to come here? What do you mean? And also for many Americans, I have to give them the grace that it is far. The U.S. is far from everywhere, but of course, South and Latin and North America. But most Americans are not migrating to South and Latin America for work, right? It's the opposite. The immigration is the opposite lens, right? So if you're an American who chooses to live abroad, you're going to one of the UK, France, Belgium, Germany, and those are you have to cross an ocean. And many Americans live and die in the same zip code. Many Americans don't even live their state or their town or their city. It's a very big ask, it's a very big jump to actually leave home, like leave your home. So I'm one of the very few who I know still to this day who has left. I think only 1/3 of Americans have passports. So it's not a thing, to be quite honest. It's just not a thing. Post-COVID, I'm sure it's upticked. Post-Trump's America, I'm sure it's upticked. I think it's going to uptick as many people become very disenfranchised and the American dream starts to crumble around us, But for many years, the U.S. was the powerhouse. It was an economic superstar. The issue was the other way. We had migrants and expats coming to live and work here. And the most you do is just, your European vacation for 3 weeks out of the summer, but you always know you're coming back home. And that's a beautiful thing, to always know that your home is your home.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd give America that. We do create a good socioeconomic foundation for many people, not all people, but many people. So there really isn't that need to expatriate or migrate. But yeah, so for many people, I think it's just people who love to travel, people who maybe speak in a second or third language and maybe want to go for a language school. But to say that you're never coming back home, which is what I did, is still shocking to my family. And I've been abroad for 6 years.
That's very interesting. That's a very interesting experience to compare, because what I see from Brazilians is there is this aspect of just going and living and seeing what's happening, right? There's a lot of us. Some of us go to study for a year or study for 6
Yeah.
months, and then some of us end up staying because we liked it so much and we realized that it made much sense. There is this aspect of when you experience a different culture from yours and you realize all the good things that you can have in this different place, you're like, oh, this is really cool. And there
Yeah.
are the people that, of course, come back to Brazil and they're like, listen, that was great. I loved it. It was very good. Those are good. And those are experiences I'm going to treasure for an entire life. But then I'm
Right.
back home because of whatever, right? Because there's this economic gain that you get
Of
in
course.
Brazil for living abroad, because then you had an international experience.
Of
That's
course.
one of the things that people were trying to tell me, and maybe going into a little bit of my story, because I lived in Berlin for almost 2 years, and then I moved here to the UK, where I've been living for almost 3 years, and
Amazing.
it's going to be 5 years February
Congrats.
next year that I left Brazil. And I guess when I was going through a period where I struggled, because I didn't want to have that path of the person that was an immigrant in a country trying to figure out and struggling because, they wanted to try something different, or because that was kind of like the only way in, or they wanted to better their lives, whatever it is. I didn't want to have that experience. I wanted to have a more kind of like safe experience. And then I do also have to recognize my privilege, because I did have a very I had a very privileged life. I was never rich, but I had a privileged life my entire life back
We
home.
were comfortable. We had comfortable
Exactly.
lives.
Exactly. So I could, enjoy most of the things that I wanted, and I was able to get pretty high in my career in Brazil. So I also was able to enjoy and live my life. But there was aspects related to mental health, related to like um, not identifying with the country anymore, not identifying with being there full time anymore, that made me make the decision. And I moved to Berlin, which was never the dream, but Berlin was my ticket out, was my
It
way
was
out because
the stepping stone to your actual dreams and fulfillment.
exactly, because it was the way that I was able to move abroad without having to struggle that much, because
Of course.
I was transferred within a company that I already
Exactly.
worked for and had a good working relationship with. So it was a little easier to make that move, because then, it's a safer move. And I mean, we all know how that went down. It was like I had great moments, I had terrible moments. My second burnout happened when I was in
Yeah.
Berlin, right? And we're of course going to talk about mental health, um but then it was there that I realized a bunch of things. And when I moved to London, I stayed here for, I guess I'm being here for 3 years, but my first 6 months were really cool. But at the same time, I was almost having a third burnout because of the company that I was working for there. But I was able to catch this one earlier.
That's
And,
good.
but then I went through a layoff. And then I was like in the big layoffs of the tech world in 2022, right?
It
That
was
all the
bad.
companies went through. So many companies went through. It's still a lot of the tech world is still recovering from that. But I then realized what it is to be an immigrant in a new place. Because different from Germany, I didn't have a network here
Yeah.
necessarily. So it really put it was really a little bit of a struggle to be able to find something in terms of like having a job, a full-time job, because it was like a little bit of, it was a struggle, because I was then feeling the real experience. And I found this happy place now where I was able to create then this business that I'm doing, and be able to work majoritarily with Brazil. So majority of the people that I work for are in Brazil. So my clients, what I do, the vast majority of them are there. But some Brazilian companies, they do have clients, they have stuff here in Europe. So I end up being like the name they call when they need something done here,
Of
because
course.
it's just easier, I'm closer, it's cheaper, and all that. And so this has been an interesting aspect, because I've met a bunch of people that have this kind of like setup around the world, which they live in the place they want to live, which in my case is London, but they work for wherever it makes more sense to them. So, for
Multinational. Yeah.
example, I know a lot of people that travel that are Brazilians that do that, mostly in Portugal, which is a phenomenon that I found out recently, which a lot of Brazilians moved
I
to Portugal
love.
because
Yeah.
you lived in Lisbon for a few months, you've been there. So it's a very safe place. It's very nice. It's cheap
And
in
also, it's
comparison.
a place to, sorry to interrupt you, it's a place that Brazilians can then acquire EU citizenship, right? Because you also have
Exactly.
a right to, as a former colony of Portugal. So also, that's also a really good,
Yeah.
topic of discussion is another stream of like people kind of also thinking a couple steps ahead is like, where can I first migrate to, then to get
Exactly.
citizenship or a blue card or Schengen, because you also have, in a sense, you have to be kind of strategic of where you're going if you know you want to create a life somewhere, right? Because getting citizenship in the UK, is almost impossible. Getting citizenship in the US is near
Really
impossible.
complicated.
But there's many countries like Germany, France, Portugal that is a much easier and straightforward path to citizenship, right?
Yeah,
And
and there's
so,
this thing where, because of all the decolonization in Brazil, a lot of us are able to get European passports because of our families.
exactly,
I was never
true,
able
true,
to get like
true,
a
true.
German passport, for example, because of a specific situation, which is a very interesting story that I like to tell. Basically, my great parents came to Brazil running away from the
The
wars, right?
Holocaust,
Basically, the
yeah,
world wars. And there is a moment where Germany was basically like, you have to come back or you have to give up your nationality. And basically, my family gave up on their nationality.
of
And then
course,
there was
yeah.
never any kind of like reparations law for families that have done that. So, so there is kind of like a lost topic in a way. So there's a lot of like German
Very
Brazilians, if that makes sense,
interesting.
Brazilians from German descent that are not able to get a passport. Like my entire family from the German side is not able to get a German passport. My grandpa, who was born of a German couple, doesn't have a German passport. Never had a
So
German
interesting.
passport. So it's very interesting. But the thing about passport and visa, and I guess Portugal has a bunch of like incentives for people that want to live abroad, that want to be there. So they have incentives, which generates a whole discussion about the local economy and people that are local and whatever.
Gentrification, pricing the locals
Exactly.
out of their homes.
And the thing that happens is a lot of
Yeah.
Brazilians move to Portugal, not only because of all of that, but also because the way things are priced in Brazil, for example, now, or at least in São Paulo and bigger cities, it's it's almost like a one-to-one
Probably on
match
par. Yeah,
in
I can
with
imagine.
Portugal
with
specifically,
with
right?
Lisbon, I'm assuming.
Exactly. So it's like it's the same thing. I remember when I
Sweet.
visited Brazil in the beginning of the year, I was like, I was spending this kind of money when I spend some time in Lisbon. So that's very interesting. And what a lot of them do is they moved to Lisbon, but they continue working for Brazil because they make more money that way.
Wow.
Because of all the
Wow.
things in Portugal about
And the
there is this
taxes. Right.
social thing in Portugal or where social economical thing where there isn't much movement for higher salaries or people are very comfortable in the way they live life, which is a choice and a decision, and if they're happy with that, that's great. But then a lot of Brazilians are like, I'm going to live in this place where I don't have to learn any other new language. I can communicate. It's fine. It's I can make good money working from this Brazilian company, and it's just a
Yeah,
quick flight
definitely.
between Brazil and São Paulo or the rest of the country. Even if you live in the Northeast, girl, it's 5 hours flight, 4 hours flight. It's
Amazing.
so close. So it's
Wow, I
really,
didn't know that.
so people can move back and forth fairly easily. And which fun fact, there's a study, I forget where I saw that, but basically there is a study that says that in X amount of years, half of the population of Portugal will be Brazilians. And a lot of the kids that are growing up there, they're learning
That's
a mixture of
amazing.
Brazilian and
Portuguese
Portuguese,
language.
Portugal Portuguese from Portugal and from Brazil. There's like a mix. So there are
Yeah,
people who are very mad about it. Other people are like, I don't give a shit. Like I don't care about any of this. So,
honey,
but yeah.
this wouldn't be the case if you didn't come to my house first. So now I'm coming back. Sorry, sorry, not sorry.
Exactly. But that's the very interesting thing. A lot of my Portuguese friends speak English because there's people that live there that don't speak Portuguese. So they just naturally got used to speaking English as well to
Definitely.
people that are not so this is one of the beauties that I find from immigration and being a global citizen. This is one of the main gains that I have
Definitely.
had, which is this contact with so many different cultures, and you put your culture into perspective. You put your life into perspective. And I guess the hardest and the most interesting part about moving abroad is your problems are never going to get away. The
You
issues
can't
you
run
have to
from
deal with,
yourself.
the things you have to they come with you, but they appear in a different way.
The
And
lens is different, yeah.
exactly. And what I noticed from living abroad is there are a lot of people that move abroad are able to work out on those issues because then they see them in a different lens and they're like, oh, so this is what I'm able to do, which was my case. Other people realize that, oh, this is not for me. Like, I'm going to go back to Brazil because being in Brazil makes me much happier than being here. I tried it. I had the experience. I'm going to go back because the world of work is harder because of all the things that we get as Brazilians, because of all the xenophobia, because of all the things that we still get as Brazilians. I get it as a
I
Brazilian, and
bet.
not as much as other Brazilians who do not
That
look like an
percentage,
European
yeah.
person like I do, because I do have, like, at a first sight you wouldn't
Phenotypically, yeah.
guess exactly I'm necessarily Brazilian. But I have a friend and he's black. He came here to spend 5 weeks, and all the things that he told us that people would talk to him and say to him, and and
Awful
all the
for
things.
him, sorry.
Me and my two other friends who look very much European, all white, we're looking at him and we're like, one has been here for 10 years, the other one for 6 years. I've been here for, at the time, like two. Almost, I was completing my third year, and we looked at him and we said, "We never been.
Yeah,
We
racism, isn't it wild?
exactly, because then you see a person that is different from what you're used to, from what you that structural racism sees, and then he
Exactly.
experiences a much worse experience
Yeah.
in terms of as, like, even if for 5 weeks. The good thing is that he's extremely charismatic, and he at the same time he's very strongly minded. He has a very strong personality, so he deals with those things beautifully, and he doesn't care.
More resilient than which is good. Yeah.
Exactly. And I would say sometimes to a fault, because it crosses, it becomes a fine line between resilient and naiveness, because sometimes it's like, I don't think you understand that, like,
That was a microaggression.
exactly, like literally. But he was gonna only stay there for 5 weeks, so that was
It's
okay.
okay.
In that sense, it's okay. But it's just like whenever I would tell people in interviews that, oh, I am actually from Brazil, that would
From the
change the
shock.
conversation
Like,
almost
what?
entirely. Like
Oh,
people
I
would treat
bet.
exactly people would treat me differently, and I found out that I have ADHD here in the UK, and I realized that,
I
and
could have
then
told you
whenever.
that. But
Hmm?
anyways, I could have told you that.
A lot of people told me that. Like I was telling some people, they're like, "You didn't know?"
Duh.
I was like, I mean, I had an inkling, but when I would talk to health professionals in Brazil about it, they would say, no, it's just the anxiety. But then my doctor
So
here told
often
me
misdiagnosed. Often,
exactly,
often,
and that's what
often.
happens. But that's one of the positives about being from a different culture, because in Brazil, there's a lot of, first of all, Brazil is the number one country with cases in anxiety. So almost 10% of our population is
Oh,
deals with an anxiety
anxiety
disorder.
disorder.
So we're like, no, we jumped from number 6 to number 1 from 2018 to 2019. I don't know how it is today because the last numbers are from 2019. But so far we are the world's most anxious country.
Wow.
And so, and there also is a history of misdiagnosing kids with ADHD. So they
Mm,
would just diagnose a bunch of kids with ADHD just because they were maybe a little bit more anxious, or they showed some signs, but they were
mm.
not necessarily full on ADHD. They just had, I don't know, they're just going through a
Some
period. They're just
behavioral issue. They're just children growing up. There's
exactly.
children, yeah, existing.
And and what happened is like, and there are children growing up in a world where we have much more access to information, new generations and new things. So there was a big movement in Brazil within the health world to try to not rule out other things before saying it's ADHD.
There's still a very big stigma attached to it. I
Exactly.
think to any type of neurodivergent, existence, right?
Absolutely.
ADD, ADHD, Asperger's, autism, right? Because people want
Yeah.
it to be the last case scenario, right?
But the
Because
problem there is that it was the first case scenario, and then they were just
that's
giving Ritalin to a lot of
they're
kids.
just prescribing drugs to children.
Exactly. So that would generate a different issue, which for some of those kids was drug addiction, and other kids like would have like their cognitive functions would be messed up with when they
Of
would
course.
grow up on it because they're just misdiagnosed. So that's when the cultural aspect is interesting, because when I got here and then I did this assessment because I was going through a lot of anxiety, he basically said, "Have you ever thought about ADHD?" I said, "Yes, but the people that
So
diagnosed
yeah.
me don't think it's the same." And he said, "Let's just do it." And then basically, and he said, "Just do like one of the free ones online just to see how you go." And then I did it, and he was basically like, "Girl, there's
Ding ding
no
ding, we have a winner, yeah.
exactly like here's your prize. You have ADHD, neurodivergent. Congratulations." And this is one of the interesting things, because all of this cultural thing, it doesn't come with you for the good and for
No.
bad. It's not
Yeah.
perceived for good and for bad. So I luckily had amazing experiences in this sense. Whenever I needed help for my mental health, I luckily had very good experiences. But I know people that, for example, in case of therapy, um, like my therapist was telling me, this one person that he used to do therapy that lived in Australia, and then the person was going through a tough period, and then they shared their story in therapy. And as Brazilians, we are open books, so we overshare
More
things
open,
naturally.
yeah.
It's a very typical trait of a majority of us to just overshare about our lives. So the way that she shared how she was going through the thing, the therapist understood through their cultural biases and intercultural like communication that she was going through the severe depression, and she was so scared. So she decided to talk to a Brazilian therapist, and then this therapist was basically like, "No, you're going like it's okay, like it's not that serious." So there's also this, there is like for the good and for the bad, and it's very interesting because we forget a lot of the times when we move abroad of these basic things. A lot of us just go because there is this beautiful thing about, even if it's for education or if it's for
You
because I
figure it
want
out
to
when
have
you get there.
exactly, I figure out when I get there. And when you get there, you then realize, wait,
Oh, snaps.
But how about medication? How do I get access to it? Like, how do I get access to the medication that I need to take to survive, for example, in most serious cases, right? And all
Absolutely.
these complex things that sometimes we forget to factor in when we
Yeah.
decide to go to a place. So that's one of the reasons why I today, knowing everything that I know, I question a lot of my friends that want to move to the United States because of the health aspect. Because
Hmm.
I because I
Absolutely.
haven't had in Brazil. We generally have we have a public health system, which depending on the city you live in, it works best. It doesn't work
Of
amazingly. It
course.
depends on where you are. But anyway, but a lot of us get private healthcare through work, even if it's
Through
like a
work.
small little whatever one. We get some, and I know that's not the reality for a lot of people that live in America. And also, even if you get private healthcare, the stories that I hear is that it's very confusing. It changes all the time. It covers, but it doesn't. It's covering one moment, but then the other day is not covering anymore. So it's a little confusing from what I hear, and that's why I question my Brazilian friends that go there because it's always like if anything happens to you, even though it's maybe the wait line is going to be huge, you have where to go. If you go there, if something happens to you, it's going to be like how are you going to deal with it? Because we forget to think about these things, and then it comes to the actual reality of what it
Hmm.
is to live abroad. When you start to realize the small little things that you don't realize when you are fantasizing about being in a new country, when you are fantasizing about maybe the movies you saw, or maybe the stories that people told you, or maybe the half stories that people told you, because maybe you know people that, or you're closer to the person when they were able to succeed, but to get
Mm.
to that success, they go through a lot. And that's why when I was going through the tough period that I've been through here, which unfortunately then goes back to the point that I was saying, that I didn't want to have this path of the struggling immigrant, which I had. A
Mm.
lot of the questions that I was asked was, why don't you come back, or why don't you go to another country in Europe? That was like the question that I was asked a lot. And that's when a lot of us, I would say, break, right? That's when a lot of
Mm.
us, regardless of where you're from, a lot of us kind of break, and a lot of us are like, does this really make sense to me? Do I still want to be here? And which is a natural thing that generally happens around the first year mark. That's what I learned from a lot
Oh
of
yeah.
people, and I could kind of like empirically understand that this is true, because when I hit the first year mark in all the two places that I lived in, it's exactly like this. It was like, okay, um, I do I want to stay here? Do I want to be here? Which in my case, it was right like a few months after I was laid off, and I was like, what the hell do I do in my life? Right? Do I move countries? Do I leave this apartment? Like, what do I do now? And this is always going to be the make it or break it of your experience abroad. The moment of struggle is always going to be the make it or break it, because you're going to go through great moments and you're going to go through terrible moments, as you would have gone back in your home country. That doesn't change.
Absolutely.
That is the human condition, right? That's We are
Absolutely.
made of ups and downs. The only moment where things are completely balanced is when we are dead, which is a flat line, and that's the only moment, right?
The only time we'll ever have peace.
Literally, because it's the absence of everything. So
Right.
you know, so you go through all of these things, and then it's all you always have, or the always the math, the equation you have to take into consideration is, why am I here and why do I want to stay, right?
We
When
never ask ourselves why,
Yeah,
right? I always say ask yourself why 3 times. Three
yeah,
ask because you got to dig in deeper. Because on paper, for many of us, it's the exploration, the cultural, experience, the social economic. But there's also many gateways for that, and moving is the most severe of gateways. If we're being quite honest, it is the last stop to that gateway. I think we also have to take in account in the living abroad, the living aspect. You still have to live. You still have to function in society. You still have to be a productive member of society. Because most of the time you are in a transactional relationship with your visa that's attached to your work. And that also brings a lot of stress and anxiety where at any given day you could be laid off to do something out of your like yourself out of your control, right? And most of our visas, most of our residence and our migration papers are tied to our careers, right? And sometimes that can be of detriment, because we don't have the autonomy and agency to guide our life when you're also in a sense being at the mercy of, not being laid off, not being fired, not having a bad relationship with your manager, not hating your job, not getting along with your colleagues, right? All these things that happen at home every single day, but you don't feel as stuck, as frozen, as trapped as you do when you have uprooted your whole life. And yeah, I think it's a very it's very it's a very it's a very romanticized concept, and I think it's romanticized because of also just like the global media. I think we also don't take it into. I think the good thing about social media is we do feel like a global race, the human race, right? We feel like very connected. So I don't think so. I think we feel very connected to other people and other cultures, which is great. But you also only see the highlight reel of living abroad in Amsterdam or Dublin or the UK. No one posts their, coming getting off work at 8 p.m. No one posts waking up at 6 a.m. to get on the train, your long commute to work. No one posts, your back-to-back meetings and calls. No one posts your asshole who's a manager, but you're forced to be in rooms with them. No one posts the microaggressions or sexism or the racism or the xenophobia or the homophobia or the transphobia or the ableism. That happens at home every single day, but it's home. You roll your eyes and you get on with your day. But those pains, those little wounds hurt, and they hurt more, and they heal a lot slower when you're abroad, right? Because I think also, like your friend, it's much easier to have a rough day when someone looks like you, right? But if I'm having a rough day in, let's say, in Thailand, and I'm the only person in the room that has my pigmentation, my color, if I'm the only person in the room who is queer, if I'm the only person in the room who is not able-bodied, I think that feels a lot, it hurts a lot more, right? Because you're kind of like gaslighting yourself. Like, did they say this because I'm an immigrant, or did they just say this? Was it a microaggression? Was it because I'm black? Was it because I'm queer? Was it because I'm not able-bodied? You at home, it's just like that person's an asshole, right? You carry on with your day. But when you live abroad, it's like, is it because of my migration status? Is it because I'm othered? And I think that also plays into account of your mental health and your well-being, right? And then for that, you want access to mental health care, therapy, medicine. They have to go through the whole, system of healthcare in a different language, most likely, right? That is such a big task. Health insurance and healthcare is difficult in your spoken mother tongue. Doing it in a different language, like we both did in Germany, I just didn't go to my doctor's appointments because I just had so much healthcare anxiety. I was like, I'm just not going to go because my German is like B1, and they're going to tell me some things about my uterus and like things I'm not going to understand, right? Or I would go with like a good friend who's a German speaker, but they may not have, they may be at work when I need to go to the doctor's appointment. So I would literally just not go to the gynecologist some days because I was just like, I don't want to deal with the anxiety of being stuck in a room with someone who refuses to speak English, which is their right. I should learn German, right? That's on me. But let's be honest, learning a second language is extremely difficult, especially a Germanic language. So kudos to those who do, but I didn't, right? I'm just not a person who deals with languages well. I'm definitely more of a mathematical, statistical person. Languages and lexicon is not my cup of tea. So sometimes you just choose not to do it because you don't want to deal with the anxiety and stress and embarrassment and shame that comes with it, right? Like you feel shameful for not learning the language. You feel shameful for not understanding what's going on. You feel shamed, Shame is such a terrible emotion. It's such a debilitating emotion. And it's emotions that are going to come with this experience of being abroad. But we don't talk about it because nobody wants to talk about it because
And also
that's not
the
sexy.
immigrant guilt. That's another thing that we deal a lot.
I call it survivor's guilt. During the pandemic in Trump's America, I had horrible survivor's guilt. Horrible. I felt like such a traitor to my country. I felt like a traitor to Black Americans. I felt like a traitor to feminists. I was like, I'm just leaving because y'all are on your own. Because in a sense, you're like, what can I do for my country as an individual?
I have the same feeling back home. Like, I am here, I'm living this life. Like, how can I always had this in the back of my mind of like, how can I bring some of this back home, some of this money, some of this experience, some of this whatever. And I guess both of us were privileged to not be that person that sends money home, which is the reality for a lot of people.
I did. I sent money home to my mom when she was sick, so she couldn't work. So for 2 years, I sent money back home. My mom was dealing with breast cancer until she died. But yeah, that wasn't the goal, right? I was a
Yeah.
student. But that also shit changes. Sorry, our parents get older,
Yeah.
and our parents get sick, or our family members go through life. So also have to think about that. You may go for the exploration and experience and travel, and then 3 months later, you have to deal with sending money back home because someone fell ill. That's also, or some people also just go back home, right? Because you become, I was the primary caregiver for my mom for 6 months. I left Germany because to take care of my mom. Most people, when they leave, they don't come back. But I was in a very good position with my team and my manager. Also, it was a pandemic, so I could work remotely. But God forbid, I left Germany for 6 months and my migration papers lapsed because I was taking care of my
Mhm.
dying mother. Most companies would be like, they would be like, sorry, girl, sorry that your mom's dying, which is, in a sense, on paper, but they gave me grace and they trusted me, and I was just in a very good position, right? But what if you went for a reason and the reasons change overnight?
Yeah.
You
Exactly.
have, what do you do then, right? No one tells you about that thing because no one wants to talk
Hmm.
about an aging parents, because nobody wants to think about their parents ever leaving them. It's literally the worst thing that could ever happen to many
Yeah.
people is one of our parents not being with us anymore. That's also the guilt that you get when you are away from home. It's like, I'm missing these moments and these memories and these time with my family. That's
Yeah.
also a very big, and I wish I loved my family enough to go back to the US, but I don't. But
Which honestly, it's a fair feeling to have, and it's one of the reasons why also people leave their home to go wherever, right? They
exactly,
wanna free themselves from that
a physical
situation.
distance and emotional distance from
Exactly. I
not the
had to
most
make
healthy relationship dynamics. Exactly.
Before I left Brazil, I made peace with the possibility that I wasn't gonna see my grandpa anymore. That's one of the things that I did because
Yeah.
he passed away while I was in Germany. And but then I have a very specific relationship with my family where I was raised very independent.
Yeah.
I was raised very independent, very like you take care of your life, go and live your life. And for the longest time, I felt guilt about it because I was like,
Nice.
shouldn't I be more present? Shouldn't I be there? Shouldn't I be closer to my family? And then I have a business mentor now, and she is this very wise, incredible woman. And when she talks about her kids and when she talks about this kind of like experience, because she talks about generational relationships a lot, Gen Z, and she's Gen X, and she talks about like how gets the she pulls the responsibility back to her generation, which is in general the generation that no
Parent us. Yeah.
yeah, exactly, raised Gen X and Gen Z. And she says that the best thing a mother can do or the best thing a parent can do is have their life, is have their own life,
Amen.
is have their own life.
Preach.
Because and then she says, the worst, she says like, why would I want my son coming back every year to like this place that I live in? I want to go there, girl.
I want to leave
I
too.
want to go to the Cayman Islands. I'm leaving. I want to go to Greece. We can travel in here, like we can go out somewhere else, which is true because it's that aspect of parents being able to create their own lives, which was the case of my mom. After a
Yeah.
long time and understanding this separation, my mom started having her life after she went
Yeah.
through this very rough period, and she started having her life, and this was the best thing for my relationship with her because I couldn't be there for her. And I guess because I was raised so independent, when she was going through it, there wasn't much I could do.
Yeah,
There wasn't much
exactly.
I could do, you
Also, it's
know?
not your role as a child to be our parent's
Exactly.
parent. So at the end
Absolutely.
of the day,
Like
it's one of those.
we don't owe anything back to our parents for any reason. There
We
is
didn't
no
choose to be
moment.
born. We didn't choose to exist.
Exactly. And this is not only us talking. Again, my mentor who's Gen X says the same thing, everybody. See if anybody
Well,
wants
your
to.
mentor is a rare. She's in rare form, or they're in
She
rare
is.
form.
She is rare. And
It's
that's
This
why
is not what our parents say. Our parents feel like
yeah.
we're indebted to them until we die,
Oh,
which
absolutely.
is,
Not
and
true.
also different culturally, right? Because the
Yeah.
global south, right?
Oh,
Most northern, the north is just like they're. I mean, they're out the house at 18. That's a very common thing
yeah.
for my American friends who are non POC, non ethnic. My white friends, they're out the house at 18 and they come see their family Christmas, Thanksgiving, and July 4th, right? So they were also fiercely dependent. But if you come
Yeah.
from many cultures, Latin American, African, Asian, the which is also, I guess we can tie it to my lived experience working in Thailand, is a communal collective versus the
Yeah.
individual collective. I think that also has a big impact on your experience abroad, is depending on which type of culture did you come from, an individual culture or a communal culture. And they both have their pros and their cons. They both have their reasons for existing. Pick and choose your fighter. I mean, I've
Pick
lived
a
in
struggle.
both. Pick, pick honestly, literally pick
Literally.
one, but just pick one.
But since you mentioned Thailand, I would love to hear what are the main differences that you realized going to a Western country where we would have some similarities, and going living in an Eastern country, which even though it's the global South, and there are some
Oh,
similarities,
it's
completely
completely
different.
different.
I just know that Filipinos and Brazilians are quite similar
Oh, that's
because there's a
nice.
lot of similarities between that. That's what a lot of people tell me. But in terms of Thailand, I have no idea. So I would love to hear what did you notice or the main differences?
Yes. So I guess the context is Thailand is one of the only countries that was never colonized. So they're one of the only countries that only speak their mother tongue, which is wonderful, right? Because they're able to really have their culture and their history remain very true. No outside influences of maybe imperialism with the U.S. or the U.K. or France or Spain, like many places in that region did. So the context is Thailand is built for Thai people, as it should be. I mean, the living experience, the tourism experience is built for Western tourists. That's different. But I don't work in tourism. I worked for a tech company. So the tech company was Dutch American, so very multicultural, very all the wonderful things that you want your company to be, right? But the actual experience of Thailand is very Thai. In essence, is very Thai. And even other friends from Asia who came to Thailand were like, "Well, this is very different from back home," because maybe they were imperialized or colonized by the U.S. or the U.K., right? So they have that Western influence in their Eastern home. But Thailand is Thai, which comes with a lot of difficulties because it's a collective culture that holds very true to their essence of their culture. And I think it's wonderful. It's very much so like three generations in a household, child, parent, grandparent. It's very communal living. But as a mental health expert, that was one of the biggest challenges at my work was because of this hierarchical sense of leadership and this safe face culture. So if you live and work in a collective culture, the needs of the individual go behind the needs of the community. And for me, it was the work community. Our work became the community. So we'd have issues with maybe managers or leaders who are maybe toxic or dysfunctional, unself-aware, who were causing harm to their employees. But employees would only come at the very last leg of their burnout or their anxiety to come speak to me because they did not want to, in a sense, go against the hierarchy, which is very difficult when you're struck when someone who's causing you harm is someone of higher status. You take the harm and you ingest the harm and you internalize the harm, but the body keeps score, right? And that
And
score was anxiety, burnout, and then absenteeism, right? Sorry, go ahead.
no, sorry. There's that one thing that a lot of the main violences we suffer, right? The main harm we suffer generally is in our families. All the
1000%.
all the rates of harassment women deal with is from someone they know. So it's
No, for
always
sure.
in this enclosure, in this place where in the communal places, the communal living places, countries, they do experience that much more. And I guess we see that. Because in Brazil, we have that kind of this is company is a family and all that bullshit. That connection because we're a very emotional kind of culture. Well, how would you say that is in Thailand?
For yes, I would think so. Yeah, absolutely. I think I also have to say my company was a company that treated their employees very well. They expected a lot from employees, but they treated their employees very well. So my company Agoda was 60% Thai, 40% migrant expat. So I'm just only speaking about my Thai colleagues, right? Because my migrants and the expats is a different lived experience. But for many of my Thai colleagues, this position they were making three times as much as they would in a Thai company. So also there was an allegiance to the company due to the financial needs and the financial, goals that they were getting. Because if they went next door to a Thai company, they just don't have the means to pay their employees what a Dutch or American company does, right? Because Thailand is still, in a sense, a second world country. They're still an industrialized country, right? So if you're a Thai person that was able to speak English or go to English school and get this job in an English speaking company, you felt an allegiance to stay, because if you ever left for any other reason, no matter any other company you went to, you would get a significant pay cut. So I think the also family tie was also a financial tie, right? Like I feel like this is my family because they're taking care of me so well, right? They're providing so much needs for me. I mean, many of my Thai colleagues, they were the sole breadwinner in their family, or they're sending money back to the northern region, which is more rural. So Chiang Mai, Pai. So there's also this like kind of, in a sense, a shackle, a financial shackle, capitalistic shackle to many of these companies, where there are only so few booming industrial Western companies in Bangkok, in Thailand, who do felt that allegiance because of the financial security that it provided you. And it was a wonderful company, but they also expected a lot. They were paying you to do work. And also in Asia, it's very 8 to 8. You come early, you leave late, and this is very normalized. So you just spend most of your time with your colleagues and your team, because I'm here for 12 hours a day, right? Like we went for breakfast, went for lunch, went for dinner. I did not because I have boundaries. But many of my Thai colleagues and then my Western colleagues did, because that was just kind of the culture of the company, right? They spent, you were never alone. Even in the bathroom, I would have like stall to stall with a friend, and I would be speaking over the bathroom in the toilet. It's a very interwoven connection, and which is wonderful, because very, very low rates of loneliness in Thailand, very, very low rates of depression in Thailand, right? But very, very high rates of anxiety, burnout, and stress, right? So it's pick your poison. So it really it depends on what you also prioritize, right? I'm someone who really likes her individual time. I'm someone who's very autonomous, someone who really likes agency. So working in the West is a much better scope for me. But I have many colleagues from Eastern Asia, Eastern Europe, who kind of had the same collectivism, who really thrived in Thailand. I had many colleagues from Latin and South America who really thrived in Thailand because it was very much connected to their home. I had many Nigerian colleagues who love Thailand because Nigeria is just as toxic in our community. So it really depends. But my experience is very different because I'm an American, and that's the only home I've ever known. It's what I'm most culturally connected with. And it was very anti-American, right? America's just like, we don't care about no. It's about dog eat dog. It's about who can get there first. It's very competitive. Thailand is very collaborative. Everybody has to speak. Everyone's voices are heard, and so it's just very different, right? Some people thrive in that. Some people adapt to it. Some people don't like it, or they like it for a set period of time, right? I enjoyed it because it was just so different, and I learned a lot from like the Eastern lens of well-being, Ayurvedic medicine, different acupuncture, different type of massages to help with different type of stressors. Muscle, like it was just such a wonderful experience to, as a mental health expert, to also understand therapy and therapy speak, and pharmaceuticals. I love them dearly, but sometimes you just need to be in community. Sometimes you just need to understand that you need a support system. You need to have a friend. You need to have someone who cares about you. I mean, community can really, really dissolve many of our mental health issues if we just had community. And Asia really has that down. They really, really have very low rates of depression, because of the fact that they have such a great, great, great interconnected social safety net. But also can equate to high anxiety and high stress and high burnout and high expectations. You hear that from a lot of we call Asian Americans are the model minority, right? Because the expectation for Asians are so incredibly high. It's just so high. It's only the best of the best, and they make amazing colleagues and amazing professionals, but that also makes them very, 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 very prone to burnout and stress. So that's something we have to add interventions when it comes to stress, like people working weekends, people working long, long nights, people messaging their colleagues on holiday over the break. They just could not shut off because a lot of them saw the identity with work. Work was a reflection of their worth. So we had to do a lot of unpacking with that, but it's a very historical context. It's a very communistic way of living, right? Because a lot of Asia was ex-communist. Some are still communist, right? So it's kind of really unpacking the historical context is why individuals operate is because you have to look back to look forward. No one just exists in this world because they chose to. It's just a different, additions and subtractions of things that led them here. I think the working for Asia was amazing. The food was wonderful. People are so friendly, so open, so warm, so kind, so understanding, so patient. Lovely. It's lovely, lovely, lovely people. But they also demand a lot from you. So yeah, and some people are really willing to give that. I just wasn't. I love work.
Fair.
I love my job, but it's not. It's the least. I would say work should be the least interesting thing about you.
Yeah.
Everything else should come first before work, right? But in
But I
Asia,
guess
it's the
I guess
opposite.
that's a very important generational marker, right? Because you would always tell me you're like right at the cusp between a millennial and Gen Z, right?
I'm the
So that's a
last
very
year, 96. Yeah.
exactly. So that's like a very a generational marker where a lot of us as millennials, we after a while, after we went through all the pain and all the suffering and all everything, someone coined the term millennial rage, which is when we
Yes.
realize it's when we
All that
realize
was for nothing.
why did I
It's
why and now I'm gonna side with the Gen Z. Fuck work, like we get to that point where we're just
one
like, I
extreme
don't
to the
like
other. Yeah.
exactly. So this is something that is very interesting for you to be in this middle. But I do wanna as we move to closing things off, I
Yes.
do wanna talk about a few things that I think are positive things about moving abroad or point out a few like lessons learned as a human being in this world when you
Hmm.
are able to leave your own country. And I think when you are this sense of otherness, you are the other, you are a little bit of an outsider. I always say to my friends and the people that are part of any underrepresented group, in a way, we get this um, experience of looking things from the outside and making our
Hmm.
decisions. So it doesn't feel like we have to go through certain rules because although there is some level of expectations on us to follow said rules, people are not necessarily hold you that accountable if you don't follow them because like they're not going
Of
to
course.
100% validate you as being part of. So it's like it would be great if you could, but like yeah, it's fine. It's
It's
because you're
you have the
this.
option. You have the option. It's not like yeah. It's
Exactly.
not yeah.
So when you see
It's
things
true.
from the outside, one thing that I personally gained from moving abroad was being able to develop myself as a human being by looking at myself from the outside and experiencing things that I experienced my entire life, but having different cultures to kind of like bounce off of. So having someone from a different country just give me like feedback insight on maybe one thing that I was going through and kind of like sharing, hey, this is what I see. And you're like, oh, I never thought about it this way
Yeah.
because your own culture is so used to kind of like functioning in a specific way. And it's very few people that were able to break out of that mode to look at, I think you're dealing with this. Right. So I
I
think the
think
best,
talking about authenticity. I think authenticity. I think that
yeah,
is the biggest marker of I would say this a success. The journey is a success, but I think people
yeah,
who are able to live and work for an extended period of time is you're able to connect to your authentic, genuine sense of identity. You know
yeah.
who you are because you had to figure it out,
Yeah,
right?
and because you're put you yourself are put your cultural traces are being shown to you constantly by other people because that's not how they live life. And then you're like,
Yeah.
I never noticed that this was not necessarily me.
Hmm.
This
The
is my
environment
country
that I was
speaking.
in. Yeah.
Let me see how that sits with me. Is that also part of me, or is this something that I ended up? It's part of my adjusting to my country, which is we all do as we grow up. We adjust to the place we live in. So how do I adjust to this new place? And you said one thing, and I would always say this is going to be a choice. You said we have to integrate to a certain extent to
Yeah.
be able
That's
to
a
be in
simple.
that country. And my reaction to that is it depends on what you want out of living abroad because I don't necessarily integrate that much in in British
Me
culture
neither.
at all
I don't
because
disagree at all, actually.
because honestly, I know the few things I'm not gonna do because they are not things you do. Like I'm not gonna yell in the middle of the street because this is something that here people be like, like when I learned how to speak like to lower my voice
Or the
when I moved,
decibels. Yeah, yeah,
to
yeah.
lower some decibels, because listen, like there are some shames that, as you said earlier, that you don't want to go through. So that gives you new skills, but also it gives you a possibility. I guess the biggest sense that I felt was freedom. It
Beautiful.
feels easier to have this experience of moving away, of changing very like integral parts of your life, because once you are able to find in yourself, this is going to be very self-help now, but I promise it's going to make sense. Once you are able to find within yourself that those foundations that are strong about who you are, what you like, what you need, and whatever you are, it's easier for you to go from place to place,
Of
because
course.
you do have the internet to be able to keep in touch with your support system. Sometimes they're not there in
Definitely.
person, but you can keep in touch with them. But there's also this aspect of, I know the things that I need whenever I go to a new place. So if I'm going to spend a few months in, I don't know, I decide to spend a few months in the US, for example, for whatever reason, I know the things that I need to be happy. I know the things that I need to be to
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 thrive.
to
Yeah.
thrive in this place. So maybe I would try to focus more on that. And one thing that I also learned is the value of being with the people from your country. That's
Oh,
extremely
community is so important.
community. That is so valuable. And sometimes you're able to build community with people from other countries, and that's absolutely valid too. And
Yeah.
sometimes that's necessary, because I was able in Berlin, my community was not necessarily
Our
Brazilian.
community was not Brazilian or
Yeah.
American. It was a hodgepodge. It was a melting pot.
Exactly. It was a hodgepodge of traumatized people with anxiety issues from ever around the world who were dealing with
Dealing with seasonal
microaggressions daily.
depression.
Exactly.
Yeah, my seasonal depression, microaggressions.
Exactly. And but here in the UK, I was able to like my support system here in the UK is just a bunch of Brazilians, right? So here I live a much
Lovely.
more Brazil involved life in terms of my friends, in terms of my clients, in terms of the work that I do. And that's not a problem to me, honestly, Just dating is a different thing, but in terms of
Different
like
podcast.
it's a
Yeah.
different podcast, exactly. But in terms of like having this sense of being this community, because there's one thing that I learned very recently that I was able to give a name to it, and or like put a concept around it, which is the importance of having your own community is the sense of being received. We have this word in Portuguese, which is acolhimento, which is basically being well received,
Acceptance. Yeah.
accepted, received. People
It's
like
beautiful.
they're holding your hand. You have the people that will hold you back when you fall, but we should not get too comfortable in our community, because the world is hard. The world is confusing. So our community should be there to hold us, to give that sense of, oh, I don't have to worry about stray people
It should
here,
be a
for
soft
example.
place to land, but they should
Exactly.
not also be our they should not be our everything when we're because I think that's the
Exactly.
thing with if I was gonna hang around with a bunch of Americans, I could just stay in the US, right? So that's we also have to be
Yeah.
like,
And
I
then
need
and depending on who they are, you start seeing things that don't make sense to you anymore.
it's
They don't
true.
make
It's
sense to
so
you anymore.
true.
You start seeing like behaviors. They're like,
Why are
this
we
is
doing
not
this? Why are we doing this now? Yeah,
like, why are we talking about, like, why are we complaining about this? And that's why my support system here of Brazilians, it's very much similar in that sense, because there's a few things, like the fun things that we like about Brazil, we are able to keep it. The things that we are able to leave back, we left it back. And but the main aspect is you strengthen yourself to be able to deal and challenge the world outside of your community, so you're able to deal with it better,
yeah,
because you're going to have those two things happening to you all the time. And when you leave abroad, that is amped up, and I think that is a very positive thing. Having an
for
international
sure.
experience is a very positive thing. Being able to communicate and move around different cultures and being able to understand where people are coming from, it creates a higher level of empathy. You're able to have access to so many things that you wanted to have access to, which is one of the reasons why I want to live in London, which is one of my whys, after I asked myself so many times and had so many people being like, why don't you come back? And that never sat right with me. I never felt that good in my body. It always felt bad when someone would ask that, and I would get really annoyed and pissed. And I understood why, but I didn't understand why. And then I realized, for a bunch of reasons, but one of my whys is, girl, everything comes to London. Every single person, artist,
Epicenter. It's an epicenter of arts and culture.
exactly. So everyone comes here. And
For
one of the
sure.
main reasons I wanted to move to London was to be able to, be closer to
You're a Broadway
musicals.
girly. Yeah.
Exactly. I love my musicals. I love the art that you have here. And I didn't speak German, so I couldn't experience that in Germany.
Access that experience when you
So
were in
speaking
Germany.
the
Yeah.
language of the place you live in is fundamental. I speak English, so I never
I
had
have
to
to learn
learn a different
Dutch.
language because I
Dutch
already knew
is
the language when I came
an
here, girl.
awful language.
And you're gonna have to learn Dutch.
It's
Fun.
like German with a potato in your mouth. It is such an ugly language. If our Dutch listeners here, y'all know your language is wild.
Well, yeah, and I mean, it's also there's the financial gain. You are able to you
Yeah, I get.
you feel more. I guess I'm gonna repeat that again. You feel that freedom where you are able to observe things from outside, and you're like, I'm gonna live here, and then I'm gonna have this job, or I'm gonna like connect all these things
In a
because this
sense,
is
I mean,
gonna
like you're
be
saying, the Maslow, all your Maslow hierarchy of needs are being met, so you can actually self-actualize. You're not
exactly.
self-actualizing, and for many of us, our countries, we can maybe get the second or the third, bottom layers, but to get to the top, we have to have all three met to get to, the top, tip of the top. And
Yeah,
for you, is you were getting some of your needs met, but you weren't getting it all met. Most of us don't get all of our needs met at home, so that's why we leave, right? You don't leave because
yeah,
you're comfortable. You leave because you're uncomfortable in the you're comfortable because you're home, but you're uncomfortable, right? You don't
exactly.
feel like you can be your authentic self, where you are. And it's beautiful that you also were able to find your because most people's first move is their last move for many reasons, but you were brave enough to say, like, this is not working for me. I tried it. It was success in many ways, but for me, it's not the success I want it to be. And yeah, migrating to the UK is, and especially London, it's such a big feat, and you should be very proud of yourself. Not everyone can do it. You should
Listen,
be
the
super.
ADHD helps with being a little
It is
inconsequent.
a
That's true.
superpower. It is a superpower. I would say ADHD is a super. Once you have, like,
It helps.
your therapy and your prescriptions, because it can be very debilitating for many people. But if you can get your ADHD to work for you, I mean, I
Love my
wish.
meds. It's
I'm
great
so
for
cognitively.
capitalism. It's amazing for capitalism.
Isn't everything?
It's great. But I want to hear
Anyways,
your about for you. What are the good things you took out of moving abroad, and you know what are because from what you're
yeah.
telling me is you're one of the exception of the Americans that actually moved to stay instead of just moving to have an experience and come back. So what did you get out of it? What were your maybe positives and what were your like strong learnings?
I don't think I would be the same person if I was still home. And that for me is like the net positive. Like, there was a lot of struggles and hardships and sadness and loneliness that got me here. But I think it was not, I think my pathway in the US would have been super linear. It would have been very linear, very straight, very comfortable in a certain sense. But my pathway here was a bit all over the place. And I think that, in a sense, super cliche, but I think it's created the best version of myself. It's a version that I can truly be proud of. I definitely would be proud back home, but I probably would have stayed in Houston, maybe go to Austin. I definitely would have stayed in Texas. I would have stayed in the South. I would have never have left. If I did not leave the country, I would have stayed in Texas. I know that for sure because I love Texas. I love, love, love Texas. But that also then, in a sense, I kind of disregarded or ignored my safety net to pursue the unknown, the uncertainty, and that comes with its whole host of what we just talked about the past hour and a half, or hour and 18 minutes. But I think the net was really having the I'm I'm super solid in who I am. I'm very comfortable in my own skin. I know all the things that I can accomplish. Nobody can tell me nothing. Like, in a sense, I guess maybe you could say arrogant in a sense. I wouldn't say arrogant. I think I'm just very stable and solid in who I am, my identity, my sense of self, my worthiness. And I think that also really brings about a lot of things that you probably wouldn't get in the US because my identity was being an American, was being a Black American, was being a Nigerian American, was being a Texan. And those things were things that I did not get to choose. Did not get to choose to be an American or Nigerian American or being a Black American, but I can choose to be authentic and genuine and confident and caring and loving and kind and empathetic. These are all traits I think I definitely gathered living abroad. But yeah, I think it's one of those things where it's the journey, which is so cliche. It is truly the journey, right? Because we're not talking about the destination. The
Yeah.
country is a destination, right, on paper, but the whole hour has been the journey, right? And I think that's the most important part is really enjoy and learn from the journey. And if it's not serving you, there's no embarrassment, there's no shame to go back home because that's home. Home is home. Home is home. And it's a privilege to also be able to go back home, especially going with what's happening now in many parts of the world in the Palestinian genocide. Some people can't even go home.
Yeah.
Their home is gone. So I think we have to understand that if you ever want to go back home, if it's not serving you, if you feel lonely, if you feel sad, if you feel like maybe this wasn't a decision for you, baby, book that ticket. Book that ticket. If it's what you want to do not be in a painful position longer than you need to be, right? I
Yeah.
think Renato was able to fight through it because he knew he wanted to stay. He knew he wanted to make a life here. But if you don't think you want to, if you don't think you can, baby, go back home. Honestly, like
Or go
there's
to a
no
different
shame.
country. You never know.
Or migrate somewhere else,
Yeah.
right? Because your first stop may not be your last stop, and that's
Yeah.
okay. We want it to be because nobody wants to move 3, 4, 5 times. But if this country, this city, this place is not working for you, if you have the capabilities and the skill sets and opportunity, look around you. Countries may be next door, but they're vastly different. I mean,
Yeah.
I moved into the Netherlands. It's 3 hour drive from Germany, one of the borders, but I can tell you it's going to be a much different experience, right? So even just look to a couple borders to your left, to your right, north and south. And if you're able to maybe go to different offices, different cities, travel more. I think traveling also helps a lot of it. Traveling was my saving grace in Berlin in the cold winter months, right? If you can have the means to, definitely travel. And maybe one of the next places you travel to could be your new home. I would never have moved to Amsterdam if I didn't go to visit, right? But I fell in love with the city and I knew it was going to be my next home. So definitely create that home for yourself where you are because you only have the present moment. But if you want to figure something else out, I would say, just try and go around you. You don't have to go very far. You don't have to go to Thailand like me. That was a big jump. But my new home was right next door to me. I didn't know it. So
Yeah, and it's absolutely valid to go to the UK or to go to Australia if you are American and moving
yeah,
around the Commonwealth. It's fine. It's an easier move, but it's fine. It's still a cultural experience. It's still a change, and I think
definitely.
both of us went through a process of. I think what you said is so powerful about
It's a lot of powerful
you.
things. You have to be specific.
Let me finish. I think
Sorry.
what you said about finding yourself and finding your boundaries and finding who you are, and you said, and you feel more confident in yourself, your choices, and what you want to do, and so on. Because we touched upon it, but the loneliness is part of the process because you're
Mm-hmm.
there, you're alone, even though you have many people going through the same experience. It's this very subjective thing, very ambiguous feeling of I feel lonely. I'm not sure if other people feel the same thing, and that's why the
And loneliness
community.
is a very shameful emotion.
Yeah,
People are everything but lonely. Lonely is the last thing you ever say that you are, right?
yeah.
So many people are experiencing loneliness, but no one really wants to talk about it
And the funny
because
thing
how
is,
you're
both of us are gregarious people, and we decided to go to Berlin as our first country, which is one of the loneliest cities in the world.
we were
Which is,
smoking crack. Excuse my language. We were
but it's true. But the thing is, the
extremely lonely city.
going
Yeah.
through that, going through those hardships, in my opinion, we go through them. We have to go through them one way or the other. It's here, it's back
Oh, for
home,
sure. You can't,
whatever.
honey. Either go through it or just go through you. Pick, pick, pick,
Exactly.
pick, pick, pick. You
Pick
don't. You
pick
can't
going
avoid it.
through it, right?
Pick
And when you
going
move
through
abroad, you
it.
kind of fast track it a little bit,
Oh yeah,
you
it's on
know,
steroids.
because
Yeah, exactly.
a lot of the comfortableness of home leaves. So I think the most powerful thing that both you and I went through is understanding who we are and being able
Oh yeah.
to value our our uniqueness. What kind of tacky word to use, but anyway, the person that we are, our who, what makes us us, and how we're gonna have a relationship with the world. And I would say my
A sense
latest,
of self. Yeah.
yeah, and my latest not accomplishment, but my latest fight with to win is how do I present that into the world with
Mm,
different ways? Because,
mm,
when you
yeah,
interact with the world in different capacities, which my capacity is as a service provider, right? As a
yeah,
company.
for
So I
sure.
have to wear different masks in a way. So how do I present myself in different ways to make other people feel safe with me, that I'm going to help them without losing the sense that I was able to build, right? And
I
this
think you have an amazing gift of creating space for others to find that sense of self, right? We've had
Mhm.
many conversations and calls where I come to you, not you don't give me advice, right? I mean, I come for you for advice, but maybe you don't even need to give. You just create the space for me to unpack what I think, and I think you can. People can only do that because they've done the work.
Yeah.
You have done the work, right?
Oh, girl,
I think
and
that's super
Kimberly
talent. That's
has been
talent.
through some of my worst moments in my life. So if she's here, that means that Miss Girl is a true friend, because she's seen me in my I've seen her in her worst too.
Oh yeah,
It's mutual, but we've
yeah.
seen each
Mutual
other.
trauma bonding for sure.
Yay! But yeah, so Kim, I think at the end of all of this, um,
TLDR, yeah.
TLDR, moving abroad is intense.
Oh yeah.
It changes your life.
Oh yeah.
It puts you in a different position than you're used to. It puts your sense of self in a different light, with a
You're
mirror in
you
your face.
you're waking up and you're taking a test every single day. Like
Exactly.
the game is on. You are being like you are in your SAT, ACT, MBA. You are being tested every
For the
single day,
Brazilians,
right?
Enem, vestibular, every
That
morning.
exactly. You wake up, you have to take a test, right?
Exactly.
And yeah, and you're gonna get an A plus plus no matter what, no matter the
Yeah.
end result, no matter where you end up in a new country, in the same country, back home, you get an A plus plus for trying. Because let's be honest, many people with our means and our privilege, right? 99% of them stay.
Yeah.
At least most majority, maybe not 99%, let me not be super hyperbolic, but many people stay comfortable. Many
Yeah.
people stay still. Many people stay in a place where they know what tomorrow's going to bring, right? To a certain extent. And you already get a gold star for
Yeah.
even stepping outside of that, and
And
that's enough for me for sure,
it's a
honestly.
beautiful thing. And
It
even
is.
between sometimes if you live in a continental country like Brazil and the US, even moving between states that are very different,
That's a big deal.
it's
That's
a
a
big
big
thing,
deal.
because the cultures are extremely different, and you still
Extremely
experience the
different.
xenophobia. You experience everything you would experience, right? The
Oh
only
yeah.
difference is like there's a lot of things that you don't have to worry about. But I guess it's, although it seems like it's tough, it seems like it's intense, because me and Kim, we've been through so much intense things in our lives during the period that we lived abroad. We also had a pandemic, which tends to be a generational kind of like trauma that happens should happen
Hallmark.
once in a lifetime. But my generation and Kim's generation and Gen Z's and we're going through, I don't know, second, third, it's a lot. So it's natural, and normalizing those feelings is absolutely fine. There's no shame in feeling shame. There's no shame in feeling loneliness. There's
Absolutely.
no shame in doubting if you're made the right decision or not. The only people that are able to really understand and have your back are the people that are going through similar experiences as you when you're going through this period. Because when you count with people that are back home that never had this experience, it's probably going to be a tougher experience or a tougher conversation, or you're probably not going to have necessarily the space to
You
share.
want your feelings to be validated,
Yep.
right? And as much as we love our family and friends back home, it's a very devalidating conversation because you don't know what you don't know. You don't know what you haven't experienced. Right? They can empathize, but you really have to, like we said, create community, create connections where you are. They don't have to look like you or be from the same, ethnic or country of origin. People who have the same lived experience. It's extremely important to know that you don't gaslight yourself. I think many of us gaslight ourselves to like
Absolutely.
minimize what we're actually going through, kind of painting with rose colored glasses because that is survival, but you have to have a sounding board that also authenticates and validates and supports what you're going through. And we love our family and our friends, but sometimes they actually do more harm because they kind of keep us, either they pull us too close or they push us even further away, come home. If you one sense of something negative, I remember, I think I told my mom, I was like maybe having a bad day, maybe I just like I was going through stress with exams. Like, you just book a ticket. Book a ticket, come back home. I was like, it's just exams. Or you have other families just like,
I'm just sharing a little bit of it's just this is the
Yeah.
small thing. It's fine.
this is nothing. This is
This
nothing.
is one of the small things.
Exactly.
Yeah, girl.
But-
Well, Kim, thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for taking your time and having this conversation with me.
It's a pleasure. Thank you to my new Portuguese Brazilian speakers. I will learn Portuguese by the next podcast episode, I promise.
And
So we don't
you know
no
that's not
subtitles
going to
needed.
happen. Okay, thank you everybody so much for watching us. Well, Kim, thank you so much for being here, for sharing your experience, for sharing your knowledge, for sharing your journey, and for being so open. And
Of
for
course.
everyone watching and listening to us, I will be back in 2 weeks. Thank you so much, and have a wonderful rest of your whatever your time you're using this. Bye.
Ciao! Salut! Bispa! Nabilisan!